Max?
Yeah. Yes.
Here she comes. Where did Max go?
Right here.
Oh, that's one of Victor's Talavera pigs.
Who's Victor?
The young man who makes and sells.
So he does he make and paint this?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, and his family and I believe everyone in his town.
Wow, that is a gorgeous cerdito, no?
Yep.
And how long does it take him to make that?
I actually don't know.
How many people are involved in making that?
Well, actually, the person that fires it, that makes it, actually molds it, the people that are painting the pieces, these are all hand painted.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
And what does a piece...
It's ceramic over clay, and the Talavera is the style of painting.
Let's look at the reason behind the title of this series. Chewy is a Mexican nickname for people named Jesus. Lots of Spanish speakers are named Jesus, and so lots of people in Mexico and actually outside of Mexico also have the nickname Chewy. Jesus can be translated Jesse, even though that's not exact. Jesus, Jesse, Joseph, Joshua, Josie, all these come from the same name. If you run into someone named Chewy, chances are his name is Jesus. As Guy explained, people in Mexico pronounced his name Gooey, like gooey. Gooey is not a word in Spanish. Actually, come to think of it, G-U-I is Chinese for expensive. Hung Gui, it's real expensive. It's a little expensive, Gui Dian. So we have Chewy, Gooey, and we have Guy, who buys and sells imported items from Spanish-speaking and other countries. Chewy Gooey buys little things and big things. He has been buying and selling imports for a long time. Things have been different for him during the past 6 years. He's not a criminal anymore. He runs a clean show. The many years he used to spend doing business in Mexico were actually about buying and selling drugs. The other products he sold were just a front. I mean, a way to make it look like he was a legal businessman. Guy says the main difference nowadays is that he doesn't break the law. That got real old because he went to state and federal prisons so many times for breaking the law. It was the 8th time of getting sent up that broke his stubbornness. He finally realized how many hearts he had broken, how many lives he had ruined, how much time he had wasted doing nothing but causing trouble, stupid trouble. He regrets it all very deeply, and he says, "I feel such a debt to other people." And glancing up at Los Cielos, he says, "I feel I owe it to the man." That's why I feel comfortable with the Chewy Gooey Imports Guy. I've spent a lot of time in prisons too. My father was a guard and lieutenant, and sometimes he took me with him to the high-security federal prison where he worked. Later I visited lots of inmates in different prisons. Some of the inmates were 13 to 19 years old, and some were old. There was one big white guy named LeRoy, which is El Rey in Spanish, which means the king. LeRoy thought he was king. He used to go down to Mexico with a gun and steal gold from the gold mines. He did whatever he wanted and never seemed to care about anyone. One day he walked into an Arizona coin and jewelry shop, pointed a gun at the fellow behind the counter, and ordered him to give him the goods. The fellow behind the counter pulled out a gun, and LeRoy fired first, killing the man. Another one of his bullets went through the wall and into the hair salon next door. LeRoy walked out of the shop, acting like nothing had happened. Another man came out of the hair salon next door and ran after him. LeRoy just kept walking straight ahead as if nothing had happened. He was suddenly tackled and slammed to the ground, and the next thing he knew, he was behind bars again. He, too, had lived a life of crime. The last time I talked to LeRoy, he was on death row in Arizona, trying to get the courts to not execute him. He told me the man behind the jewelry counter that he murdered should have known better. He said people who know how to handle weapons know better than that. They know better than to pull out a gun when someone's holding a gun on them. He said the man behind the counter made a mistake. That's all he had to say. Oh, yeah, and that the Arizona state prison system was unfair. He couldn't bring himself to say that he himself was to blame. It was too painful, because then he'd have to take responsibility for his own decisions and quit blaming others. That was just too painful for such a selfish person. Most prisoners get tired of hearing each other claiming to be innocent, but most of them can't bring themselves to admit that they themselves are guilty. If you have friends or family behind bars, one of the best things you can do for them is to love them and help them admit whatever blame they need to admit. Otherwise, it's not likely that they will ever get out and stay out. That's why I noticed right away that Guy was different. After 19 years of prison life and 6 years of freedom, he has served his sentences and is determined to make a healthy contribution to society. He does this by being an honest businessman and by adding joy and interest to people's yards and houses. "There are so many people who love your place," said one customer. "Oh, that's a wonderful thing to hear," Chewy Gooey Imports Guy told me. These are some of the things at his store. Oops, he said it's not his store. Okay, it's the Desert Flower, just outside of Gettysburg. Guy used to buy some of the same things when he conducted illegal operations in Mexico. He tells of the families who worked just as hard back then, in their backyards, creating things out of wood, fabric, glass, or metal, as Guy would place his orders with them. He would tell them what he wanted, and they would make it. Not always exactly the way he wanted. He tells of the time he ordered 200 and some wooden horses from a man. Guy wanted them to be 1 meter high, which is about 39 inches. Guy says he thinks the whole town must have worked on the order, and when he and an employee went to pick up the order a year later in a semi, they discovered that the caballos were bigger than expected. Some were 8 feet high, and all the others were 4 or 5 feet high. But even back then, Guy wanted to cooperate with the artisans, the people who made their crafts. "We've only got one tractor-trailer," Guy said. "Well, I can tell him we don't want them," said his employee, "but I don't know what they're going to do with 200 and some caballos." Guy decided to bring all those wooden animals to the U.S. and try to sell them, and eventually they did sell. Sometimes Guy and his workers returned to a town to order more products from people who had made them for them before, and sometimes the people were nowhere to be found. Guy still doesn't understand it. He says maybe they felt like they had made all the money they needed. Guy describes himself in his earlier years as foolishly selfish and full of himself. "I was arrogant, he says. "I thought that if people in Mexico wanted to do business with me, they should speak English to me." While he was in prison, he learned to speak Spanish and even put a course together so that other prisoners could learn it. Guy made a lot of good memories in Mexico. To this day, he believes in paying people a fair wage for the products they make. He sees the products as a way to feed and provide for one or more families. And the prices he puts on the products in his store are very good. They don't have the enormous markup that you can find in stores that want to pay foreigners almost nothing and then turn around and charge a fortune to the buyers. So I notice these things right away in Guy, and I see a man who has, in many ways, turned from a life of selfish, foolish living. He's still working through it all, like all the rest of us, trying to use his freedom to add good things to everyone else's lives. If you get down to the Gettysburg, Pennsylvania area, I think you would enjoy looking at all the things he buys from our neighbors on the other side of the border. If you buy something, which most people do when they stop in, my opinion is that you can be pretty sure that the product you bought was made by people who were paid fair and square for their hard work.